They gave me 3 weeks and called it an honor. Archive restoration technician, on loan to the Sothel Compact, tasked with cataloging the royal relics of the Hall of Rains before the renewal writ took effect. Nobody at the consulate said what that meant in plain words. I had to read the Compact's succession code myself, twice, before I understood. Queen Selene Varin Kesserin could not bear an heir. Under Sothel law, a queen who cannot ensure the line is not permitted to keep the throne. In 30 days her reign would be quietly closed out, her relics logged as decommissioned property, and a cloned heir designate would be seated in her place, wearing her crown like a part ordered from a catalog. Nobody used the word replacement. They called it renewal. I have spent enough years around institutions to know that when a word gets that gentle, it is because the truth underneath it is not gentle at all. The Hall of Rains sat under a vaulted skylight, real daylight pouring down through old glass onto 12 generations of Kesserin relics, crowns, seals, ceremonial blades, court ledgers bound in pale leather. My job was simple: photograph, catalog, note condition, flag anything worth preserving before the hall was cleared for the incoming rain. I was 3 days into it, alone with a scanner and a tray of brushes, when she came in without announcement and stood at the far end of the gallery, watching me work on her own coronation seal. I didn't know it was her at first. No crown, no retinue, just a woman in a plain gray coat with sea blue hair, pulled back hard enough to look like discipline rather than style. Her skin held that pale, ivory gray cast their people carry, and her eyes were gold and steady and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "You're cataloging me," she said, not a question. "I'm cataloging the hall," I said. "Ma'am, that's the same thing, this month." She came closer and looked down at the seal ring in my tray, corroded almost black, the engraving worn past reading. That was struck the morning I took the throne. Nobody has touched it since. I assumed it would go in a crate marked for the archive basement, unlabeled, the way the rest of me is about to. I didn't have an answer for that, so I told her the truth instead. It's not going in a crate. I was going to restore it before I log it. Why? It's decommissioned property in 30 days regardless. Because it's not property yet, I said. It's a queen's seal. I restore what's in front of me, not what a schedule says it's about to become. She watched me a long moment, gold eyes unreadable, and then she left, without another word. I thought that was the end of it. She came back the next morning, and the one after that, and by the 4th day she wasn't watching from across the hall anymore. She was seated across the work table from me, sleeves pushed back, showing me how to hold the old cleaning brush at the angle her people used, so I wouldn't scratch the base metal. She had steady hands, careful ones, the kind that had done close work before the throne ever asked anything of her. I learned the shape of her reign in pieces, the way you learn a person's life from the objects they kept. A trade ledger from a famine year, margins full of her own handwriting, renegotiating grain contracts line by line rather than let her people starve on principle. A cracked ceremonial blade she'd used once, in a border dispute, to force a truce instead of a war. A child's drawing, pressed flat and preserved for decades, from a settlement she'd personally resettled after a mining collapse. A queen's face drawn in crayon, crown crooked, smiling. There was a shipping manifest too, worn soft at the folds, listing medical supplies she'd rerouted from her own household stores during a plague year, over the council's objection, at a cost she never let the treasury record properly. And a stack of handwritten petitions, hundreds of them, each with a short reply in her own script at the bottom, not a clerk's rubber stamp, hers. I asked her once why she'd bothered answering everyone herself, when a signature block would have done the job faster. "Because the person who wrote it waited for an answer," she said, "not a formality. If I couldn't give them what they asked for, the least I owed them was my own hand admitting it." She said it the way you'd state a fact about gravity, not a virtue she was proud of. That was when I understood the council's word. Unsustainable. Wasn't really about her body at all. It was about a monarch who had made governing personal in a system built to prefer it administrative. That kind of reign doesn't get replaced because it failed. It gets replaced because it was inconvenient to keep. "You kept that," I said. "I kept all of it." She turned the drawing over gently, like it might still be wet. "The council says none of it matters now. That the compact needs an heir, not a history. That my reign was, the word they used was, unsustainable. She set the drawing down. I have given this line 31 years of governance, and they have reduced it to a biological failure to be corrected on schedule. They're wrong, I said. You're an archivist, not a jurist. I don't need to be a jurist to see what's in front of me. I nodded at the table. The ledgers, the blade, the drawing. This isn't a defect record. This is a reign. I've cataloged enough dead institutions to know the difference between an object that mattered and one that didn't. Nothing on this table is the second kind. She didn't answer that day either, but she stopped leaving when I packed up my tools and started walking me to the archive doors instead, and on the 9th day, unprompted, she told me her birth name, the one from before the crown, the one nobody at court had used in 3 decades. The seal ring took me 11 days to restore properly. I worked the corrosion out by hand, 0.5 millimeter at a time, careful not to touch the engraving beneath, until the morning of the 20th day, when the metal came clean, and the old inscription showed itself whole for the first time in 31 years. Not a royal title, a single line, in the old script, that every Sothel monarch has struck into their first seal since the founding. I hold this for the ones who could not. I set it in her palm without ceremony. She looked at it a long time, and her composure, the same steady, tired composure she'd worn every day I'd known her, finally broke, quietly, without a sound, the way water finds a crack it's been testing for years. They want to erase this, she said. They can log the crown as decommissioned, I said. They can't decommission what you did with it. That's not theirs to file away. The renewal was set for the 30th day, at noon, before the full steward council. I wasn't meant to be in the chamber. Archivists don't attend successions. But she sent for me an hour before, and I stood at the back of the hall while the stewards read the writ into the record, and the heir designate waited, poised and untested, at the base of the dais. She let them finish reading. Then she stood, took the restored seal from beneath her sleeve where she'd carried it all morning, and set it on the table in front of the presiding steward. I am not signing this, she said. 31 years of governance is not a defect to be corrected. I will not be renewed out of a reign I earned line by line, and I will not let this line's founding oath be reduced to a biological form. If the compact requires a successor, it will name one when I choose to step down, not before, and not because a schedule said so. The chamber went very still. The steward opened his mouth to invoke the code, and she cut him off with 4 words that weren't in any writ. And I am not alone. She turned, in front of the full council, and found me at the back of the hall. Not a gesture for the room, just her eyes finding mine, the way they had every morning in the archive, steady and certain in a way I hadn't earned yet, and didn't need to. She didn't reach for me. She didn't have to. She simply said my name, plainly, the way you'd introduce someone you intend to keep, and let the council understand the rest on their own. Nobody in that chamber called it romance. Nobody needed to. It was simpler than that, and heavier. A queen refusing to let herself be quietly replaced, and a man who had spent 3 weeks proving, one restored relic at a time, that nothing about her reign had ever been something to correct. The writ was withdrawn before the hour was out. The heir designate was reassigned to a provincial post, with the compact's thanks and no hard feelings on record, and the seal ring went back into the Hall of Reigns that afternoon, not as decommissioned property, but under new glass, in the front case, where the light from the old skylight finds it every morning. I still work the hall 3 days a week. She still comes and sits across the table, sleeves pushed back, showing me how to hold the brush. Nobody schedules that anymore. It's just where she chooses to be.